Forgive my poor manners. Traveling this far west, I find myself nostalgic for the country of my childhood. Though I know it's some distance yet, I find myself seeing everywhere shadows of half-remembered faces. Are you and your good wife returning home this morning? No, sir. We go east to our son's village, which we hope to reach within 2 days. Ah, the road through the forest, then. Actually, sir, we mean to take the high road through the mountains. There being a wise man in the monastery there, we hope he will grant us an audience. Is that so? Wiston nodded thoughtfully, and once more looked carefully at Axel. I'm told that's a steep climb. My guests have not yet finished breakfast, Ivor said, breaking in. Excuse us, Master Wiston, while I walk them to the longhouse. Then, if we may, sir, I'd like to resume our discussion of just now. He lowered his voice and continued in Saxon, to which Wiston replied with a nod. Then, turning to Axel and Beatrice, Ivor shook his head and said gravely, Despite this man's great efforts last night, our problems are far from over. But follow me, friends, you must be famished. Ivor marched off with his lurching gait, prodding the earth at each step with his staff. He seemed too distracted to notice his guest falling behind him in the crowded alleys. At one point, when Ivor was several paces ahead, Axel said to Beatrice, That warrior's an admirable fellow. Didn't you think so, Princess? No doubt, she replied quietly. But that was a strange way he had of staring at you, Axel. There was no time to say more, for Ivor, at last noticing he was in danger of losing them, had stopped at a corner. Before long they came to a sunny courtyard. There were roaming geese, and the yard itself was bisected by an artificial stream, a shallow channel cut through into the earth, along which the water trickled with urgency. At its broadest point, the stream was forded by a simple little bridge of 2 flat rocks, and at that moment an older child was squatting on one of them, washing clothes. It was a scene that struck Axel as almost idyllic, and he would have paused to take it in further had Ivor not kept striding firmly on towards the low, heavily thatched building whose length ran the entire far edge of the yard. Once inside it, you would not have thought this longhouse so different from the sort of rustic canteen many of you will have experienced in one institution or another. There were rows of long tables and benches, and towards one end a kitchen and serving area. Its main difference from a modern facility would have been the dominant presence of hay. There was hay above one's head and beneath one's feet, and though not by design, all over the surface of the tables, blown around by the gusts that regularly swept through the place. On a morning such as this, as our travelers sat down to breakfast, the sun breaking in through the porthole-like windows would have revealed the air itself to be filled with drifting specks of hay. The old longhouse was deserted when they arrived, but Ivor went into the kitchen area, and a moment later 2 elderly women appeared with bread, honey, biscuits, and jugs of milk and water. Then Ivor himself came back with a tray of poultry cuts, which Axel and Beatrice proceeded to devour gratefully. At first they ate without speaking, only now conscious of how hungry they had been. Forcing them across the table, continued to brood, his eyes far away in thought, and it was only after some time that Beatrice said, These Saxons are a great burden to you, Ivor. Perhaps you were wishing to be back with your own kind, even with the boy returned safe and the ogre slain. Those were no ogres, mistress, nor any creatures seen before in these parts. It's a great fear removed that they no longer roam outside our gates. The boy, though, is another matter. Returned he may be, but far from safe. Ivor leaned across the table towards them and lowered his voice, even though they were once more alone. You're right, Mrs. Beatrice. I wonder at myself to live among such savages. Better dwell in a pit of rats. What can that brave stranger think of us after all he did last night? Why, sir, what has occurred? Axel asked. We were there at the fire last night, but sensing a fierce quarrel took our leave and remained ignorant of what went on. You did well to hide yourself, friends. These pagans were sufficiently aroused last night to tear out each other's eyes. How they might have treated a pair of strange Britons found in their midst, I dread to think. The boy Edwin was safely removed and returned, but even as the village began to rejoice, the women found on him a small wound. I inspected it myself, as did the other elders, a mark just below his chest, no worse than what a child receives after a tumble. But the women, his own kin at that, declared it a bite, and that's what the village is calling it this morning. I've had to have the boy locked in a barn for his safety, and even so his companions, his very family members, throwing stones at the door and calling for him to be brought out and slaughtered. But how can this be, Ivor? Beatrice asked. Is it the mist's work? Again, that they've all lost their memory of the horrors the child so lately suffered? If only it were, mistress. But this time they appear to remember all too well. The pagans will not look beyond their superstitions. It's their convictions that once bitten by a fiend, the boy will before long turn fiend himself and wreak horror here within our walls. They fear him, and should he remain here, he'll suffer a fate as terrible as any from Master Wiston saved him from last night. Surely, sir, Axel said, there are those here wise enough to argue better sense. If there are, we're outnumbered. And even if we may command restraint for a day or two, it won't be long before the ignorant have their way. Then what's to be done, sir? The warrior's as horrified as you are, and we too have been in discussion all morning. I've proposed he take the boy with him when he rides out, imposition though this is, and leave him at some village sufficiently distant where he may have a chance of a new life. I felt shame to the depths of my heart to ask such a thing of a man so soon after he risked his life for us, but I could see little else to do. Wiston is now considering my proposal, though he has an errand for his king, and already delayed on account of his horse and last night's troubles. In fact, I must check the boy is still safe now, then go see if the warrior has made his decision. Ivor rose and picked his staff up. Come and say farewell before you leave, friends. Though after what you've heard, I'll understand your wish to hurry from here without a backward glance. Axel watched Ivor's figure through the doorway, striding off across the sunny courtyard. Dismal news, Princess, he said. It is, Axel, but it's not to do with us. Let's not dally further in this place. Our path today is a steep one. The food and milk were very fresh, and they ate on for a while in silence, and then Beatrice said, Do you suppose there's any truth in it, Axel? What Ivor was saying last night about the mist, that it was God himself making us forget. I didn't know what to think of it, Princess. Axel, a thought came to me about it this morning, just as I was waking. What thought was that, Princess? It was just a thought that perhaps God is angry about something we've done, or maybe he's not angry, but ashamed. A curious thought, Princess. But if it's as you say, why doesn't he punish us? Why make us forget like fools even things that happened the hour before? Perhaps God's so deeply ashamed of us, something we did, that he's wishing himself to forget. And so, as the stranger told Ivor, when God won't remember, it's no wonder we're unable to do so. What on this earth could we have done to make God so ashamed? I don't know, Axel, but it's surely not anything you and I ever did, for he's always loved us well. If we were to pray to him, pray and ask for him to remember at least a few things most precious to us, who knows, he may hear and grant us our wish. There was a burst of laughter outside. Tilting his head a little, Axel was able to see out into the yard a group of children balancing on the flat rocks above the little stream. As he watched, one of them fell into the water with a squeal. Who's to say, Princess, he said. Perhaps the wise monk in the mountains will explain it to us. But now we're speaking of waking this morning. There's something came to me, perhaps the same moment you were having these thoughts. It was a memory, a simple one, but I was pleased enough with it. Oh, Axel, what memory was that? I was remembering a time when we were walking through a market or a festival. We were in a village, but now not our own, and you were wearing that light green cloak with the hood. This must be a dream, or else a long time ago, husband, I have no green cloak. I'm talking of long ago, right enough, Princess. A summer's day, but there was a chill wind in this place where we were, and you'd placed the green cloak around you, though you kept the hood from your head. A market, or perhaps some festival. It was a village on a slope with goats and a pen, where you first set foot in it. And what was it we were doing there, Axel? We were just walking, arm in arm, and then there was a stranger, a man from the village, suddenly in our path, and taking one glance at you, he stared like he was beholding a goddess. Do you remember it, Princess? A young man, though I suppose we were too young then, too. He was exclaiming he'd never set eyes on a woman so beautiful. Then he reached forward and touched your arm. Do you have a memory of it, Princess? There's something comes back to me, but not clearly. I'm thinking this was a drunken man you're talking of. A little drunk, perhaps. I don't know, Princess. It was a day of festivities, as I say. All the same, he saw you and was amazed. Said you were the most beautiful sight he'd ever seen. Then this must be a time long ago, right enough. Isn't this the day you grew jealous and quarreled with a man, the way we were almost run out of the village? I recall nothing of that, Princess. The time I'm thinking of, you had on the green cloak. And it was some festival day, and this same stranger, seeing I was in your protector, turned to me and said, "She's the loveliest vision I've ever seen, so you be sure to take very good care of her, my friend." That's what he said. It comes back to me somewhat, but I'm sure you then had a jealous quarrel with him. How could I have done such a thing, when even now I feel the pride rising through me at the stranger's words? The most beautiful vision he'd seen. And he was telling me to take the very best care of you. If you felt proud, Axel, you were jealous also. Didn't you stand up to the man even though he was drunk? It's not how I remember it, Princess. Perhaps I just made a show of being jealous as a sort of jest. But I would have known the fellow meant no harm. It's what I woke with this morning, though it's been many years. If that's how you've remembered it, Axel, let it be the way it was. With this mist upon us, any memory's a precious thing, and we'd best hold tight to it. I wonder what became of that cloak. You always took good care of it. It was a cloak, Axel, and like any cloak, it must have worn thin with the years. Didn't we lose it somewhere? Left on a sunny rock, perhaps? Now that comes back to me, and I blame you bitterly for its loss. I believe you did, Princess, though I can't think now what justice there was in that. Oh, Axel, it's a relief that we can remember a few things still, mist or no mist. It could be God's already heard us and is hastening to help us remember. And we'll remember plenty more, Princess, when we set our minds to it. There'll be no sly boatman able to trick us then, even if there comes a day we care at all for his foolish chatter. But let's eat up now. The sun's high and we're late for that steep path. They were walking back to Ivor's house and had just passed the spot where they were nearly assaulted the previous night, when they heard a voice calling from above. Glancing around, they spotted Wiston, high up in the rampart, perched on a lookout's platform. "Glad to see you still here, friends," the warrior called down. "Still here," Axel called in reply, taking a few paces towards the fence, "but hastening on our way. And you, sir, will you rest here for the day?" "I, too, must leave shortly, but if I may impose on you, sir, for a short conversation, I'd be most thankful. I promise not to detain you too long." Axel and Beatrice exchanged looks, and she said quietly, "Speak with him, if you will, Axel. I'll return to Ivor's and prepare provisions for our journey." Axel nodded, then turning to Wiston called, "Very well, sir. Do you wish me to come up?" "As you will, sir. I'll happily come down, but it's a splendid morning, and the view is such as to lift the spirits. If the latter's no trouble to you, I urge you to join me up here." "Go see what he wants, Axel," Beatrice said quietly, "but be careful, and it's not just the ladder I'm speaking of." He took each rung with care until he reached the warrior, waiting with an extended hand. Axel steadied himself on the narrow platform, then looked down to see Beatrice watching from below. Only after he had waved cheerfully did she move off somewhat reluctantly toward Ivor's house, now clearly visible from his high vantage point. He kept watching for her for a few more moments, then turned and gazed out over the top of the fence. "You see, I didn't lie, sir," Wiston said as they stood there side by side, the wind in their faces. It's quite splendid as far as the eye can see. The view before them that morning may not have differed so greatly from one he had had from the high windows of an English country house today. The two men would have seen to their right the valley side coming down in regular green ridges, while far to their left the opposite slope, covered with pine trees, would have appeared hazier, because more distant as it merged with the outlines of the mountains on the horizon. Directly before them was a clear view along the valley floor of the river, curving gently as it flowed the corridor out of view, of the expanses of marshland broken by patches of pond, and a lake further in the distance. There would have been elms and willows near the water as well as dense woodland, which in those days would have stirred a sense of foreboding. And just where the sunlight went into the shadow on the left bank of the river could be seen some remnants of a long abandoned village. "Yesterday I rode down that hillside," Wiston said, and my mare, with hardly any prompting, set into a gallop as though for sheer joy. We raced across the fields past lake and river, and my spirits soared, a strange thing, as if I were returning to scenes from an early life, though to my knowledge I'd never before visited this country. Can it be I passed this way as a small boy, too young to know where my whereabouts, yet old enough to retain these sights? The trees and moorland here, the sky itself, seemed to tug at some lost memory. "It's possible," Axel said. "This country and the one further west, where you were born, share many likenesses." "That must be it, sir. In the Finlands, we have no hills to speak of, and the trees and grass lack the color before us now. But it was on that joyful gallop my mare broke her shoe, and though this morning the good people here have given her another, I will have to ride gently, for one hoof is bruised. The truth is, sir, I brought you up here not simply to admire the country, but to be away from unwelcome ears. I take it you've now heard what's occurred to the boy Edwin." "Master Ivor told us of it, and we thought it poor news to succeed your brave intervention. You may know also how the elders, despairing of what would happen to the boy here, begged I take him away today. They ask I leave the boy in some distant village, telling some sort of story of how I found him lost and hungry on the road. This I do gladly enough, except I fear such a plan can hardly save him. Word will easily travel across the country, and next month, next year, the boy could find himself in the very plight he is in today, yet all the worse for being lately arrived and his people unknown. You see how it is, sir." "You're wise to fear such an outcome, Master Wiston." The warrior who had been speaking while gazing out at the scenery pushed back a tangled lock of hair the wind had blown across his face. As he did so, he seemed suddenly to see something in Axel's features, and, for a small moment, to forget what he had been saying. He gazed intently at Axel, angling his head. Then he gave a small laugh, saying, "Forgive me, sir. I was now just reminded of something, but to return to my point. I knew nothing of this boy before last night, but I've been impressed by the steady way he has faced each and every terror set before him. My comrades last night, brave though they were setting out, were overcome with fear as we approached the fiend's camp. The boy, however, even though left at the fiend's mercy for many hours, held himself with a calm I could only wonder at. It would pain me greatly to think his fate now all but sealed. So I've been thinking of a way out, and if you and your good wife were to consent to lend a hand, all may yet be well." "We're keen to do what we can, sir. Let me hear what you propose." "When the elders asked me to take the boy to a distant village, they meant no doubt a Saxon village. But it's precisely in a Saxon village the boy will never be safe, for it is Saxons who share the superstitions about the bite he carries. If he were to be left with Britons, however, who see such nonsense for what it is, there can be no danger even if the story were to pursue him. He's strong, and as I've said, he has remarkable courage, even if he speaks little. He'll be a useful pair of hands for any community from the day he arrives. Now, sir, you said earlier you're on your way to east to visit your son's village. I take it this will be just such a Christian village as we seek. If you and your wife were to plead for him, with perhaps the support of your son, that would surely secure a good outcome. Of course, it may be the same good people would accept the boy from me, but then I'll be a stranger to them, and one to arouse fear and suspicion. What's more, the errand which has brought me to this country will prevent me traveling so far east. You're suggesting then, Axel said, that my wife and I be the ones to take the boy from here. That is indeed my suggestion, sir. However, my errand will permit me to travel at least part of the same road. You said you would take the path through the mountains. I'd happily accompany you and the boy at least to the other side. My company will be a tedious imposition, but then the mountains are known to contain dangers, and my sword may yet be of service to you. And your bags, too, could be carried by the horse, for even if her foot's tender, she'll not complain of it. What do you say, sir? I think it an excellent plan. My wife and I were distressed to hear the boy's plight, and will be happy if we can aid in some resolution. And what you say is wise, sir. It's among Britons, surely, he's safest now. I've no doubt he'll be received with kindness at my son's village, for my son himself is a respected figure there, practically an elder in all but his years. He'll speak for the boy, I know, and ensure his welcome. I'm much relieved. I'll let Master Ivor know our plan and seek a way to remove the boy quietly from the barn. Are you and your wife ready to leave shortly? My wife is even now packing provisions for the journey. Then please, wait by the south gate. I'll come by presently with the mare and the boy Edwin. I'm grateful to you, sir, for the sharing of this trouble, and glad we're to be companions for a day or for two.